Welcome to the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea. Despite a distinct absence of mountains, rugged off-road terrain, or indeed just livestock, 36% of cars registered here are SUVs, with more than 1 in 5 spewing average emissions in the highest 10% of the UK market.
What do you think about SUVs?
They seem unwieldy.
I think it's inappropriate in London.
You don't need to drive your precious angels to school when you're within a mile of the school. I don't get it. There's a terrible habit in this city. Everybody's always in a rush. They don't make time for anything. I walked to school from the age of 6 on my own. I don't understand the mentality.
I soon realised a problem. Everyone who was slumming it on the pavements like me hated SUVs. Meanwhile, the guzzling enthusiasts weren't particularly keen to stop for a little chat.
Excuse me, sir. Excuse me, sir.
I have no real, systematic political view on SUVs, I'll be honest, which I guess is what you're getting at. It's probably you're going to argue it's bad for the environment, it causes congestion. I'll be honest with you, I do think climate change is a serious issue that people have to address. I think we have an obligation not only, let's say, to ourselves, but let's say to those yet to be born, as Edmund Burke would say. But I have no theoretical or kind of political view on SUVs.
Did you know that 1 in 10 cars in this borough is a Land Rover?
Yeah.
It's crazy.
It's quite a lot, yeah. A lot of Land Rovers and Range Rovers.
Yeah? Are they the ones you have to ticket the most? These are the top 20 emitters in the world. Where would SUV owners come?
Right now, country.
Yeah?
Yeah, UK.
Yeah? So you'd say they'd be around here? Yeah. That's where you think they'd come? Yeah? They would actually be below Germany and above South Korea. They would be 7th in the world for carbon emissions. Does that surprise you?
Yeah.
Yeah?
Yeah, definitely.
I did find one pedestrian who was happy to talk about why I was barking up the wrong tree with being concerned about SUVs, or indeed climate change at all.
I just don't believe in it.
You don't believe in it?
No.
May I ask why?
I just think there's a lot being talked about climate change and what with the restrictions and everything. I think it's all part of the global communist plan.
You know what? You're going to hate my earrings.
Literally a communist. There we go. I knew you were.
Excuse me, Mrs. Range Rover! Are you guys worried about climate change? Is it something you think about?
Yeah, definitely.
How worried are you guys, personally?
Well, I mean, we're all doomed, really, aren't we?
I feel for this generation. My son is going to be the one that suffers it, but people like me who've got to an age, I think we're less likely to worry, although I'm worried for my son.
And you're just saying, we're doomed.
Yeah.
Like, to hell with it.
Yeah. I mean, if there's one person driving a Range Rover, that compensates for something, isn't it?
Why do you like your SUV? Can I ask? What's appealing about it?
Size.
Size.
He likes the size.
Are you compensating for something,
Size.
sir?
No.
People think that SUVs are safer, but you're 11% more likely to die in an SUV than any other kind of car. Why do you think people hold this idea about safety, security in SUVs when the facts are actually the opposite?
They probably don't know that
Yeah.
for a start, and then also they're bigger, and so therefore they acquire the tank mentality. So they're sitting in this big car that's higher off the ground with bigger tyres and a bigger body, and it makes them feel kind of protected.
I tell you what, in reality, why do I have an SUV? It is the size, and it is because of I feel safe.
You feel safe?
Yeah, I do it because I'm higher up and I feel safe.
Would you change any of your own personal habits?
No. I actually run a charity in South Africa, so I do my bit.
So for every electric vehicle that's sold, there are 37 SUVs. Literally wipes out any decrease in emissions, the sale of SUVs. You wouldn't think, why don't I chuck it in, get an electric vehicle, and you can still run your charity?
No.
No. Why not?
No, because I don't want to.
Why do you like your...
Because I'm doing my bit.
I think everyone should have an amount of carbon footprints per household. So this is your amount of carbon footprints. You can use it on an aeroplane, you can have a big car. How good are you at recycling? Make your own compost at home? Like I've got my compost bins. So everyone should be allowed so many points, and then points can be mean prizes, or it can mean, put onto your carbon footprint.
I like this green Bruce Forsyth you've got going on.
Points mean prizes.
In Sweden, there ended up being a bit of a campaign to key SUVs. Now, there weren't actually that many that were keyed, but it got this huge amount of publicity and it collapsed SUV sales in a single year. What do you think about people taking things into their own hands, going, I want to collapse the SUV market, all I have in my power is a set of keys, and this is what I'm going to do?
Well, surely in a country like Sweden, which is a democracy with free speech, free press, the rule of law, that isn't the only thing in your power. You can speak out, you can vote, you can go to a town hall and talk. And I understand, and therefore, I think that's a bigger impact. And if you really cared about, let's say, stopping SUV sales, I don't know if keying SUVs really helps your cause. Maybe people stop buying the SUVs, perhaps, but people may then therefore view environmentalists as, violent hooligans or, other negative, negative kind of characteristics.
But they didn't buy the SUV.
Perhaps, but then maybe, but surely you can't stop climate change by just banning SUV sales, right?
Well, SUVs are the second biggest driver of the global increase in carbon emissions, second only to energy.
Yes,
power.
But then that, it could be the second highest, but it could only maybe be 15, 20, 30%.
A lot.
It's still a lot, but I'm saying you may hurt other policy initiatives that can more systematically target climate change. And I think if you really want to get change done, you must win over the normal guy who wants to send his kids to school, not just people in liberal, kind of well-educated environments.
How's that worked so far?
Well, I think so far I guess that's a more open question, but I don't think groups like Extinction Rebellion, let's say, are helping themselves for climate change. And I'm someone who cares about the environment and believes the state must do something about it. But I just don't think that, let's say, these more out in the streets, interrupting people's lives actions are actually beneficial to the cause.
Would you ever buy an SUV?
No, because I have taste.
There's a strong consensus that climate change is real, man-made, and it's happening. According to a poll from YouGov, 65% of Brits feel either very or fairly clear about what ordinary people can do to reduce climate change. And, at least on the pavements of the Royal Borough of Kensington and Chelsea, people tend to agree that rolling around the King's Road in a car modelled on military vehicles is, at best, unnecessary and a bit tacky. But I'm still being advised by advertising and in car dealerships to purchase a vehicle which is significantly more likely to kill a pedestrian or roll over with me inside it for the average school run in central London. Something doesn't add up. I decided to speak to Simon Lewis, Professor of Global Change Science and an expert in how human behaviour is heating our planet, to find out more.
Well, I think there's no such thing as a free market. Markets are created, and they're created for a purpose, and no one's put the time and the energy into making that market work and making the system work for electric vehicles. So there aren't enough charging points, and those charging points aren't interoperable. They're from many different providers. So there does need to be some infrastructure to help people make that leap, but we should remember that electric vehicles are like the last line of travel in a city, therefore people who can't get around in other ways using an electric bike or a normal bike or going by public transport.
I want to talk about something which I hear a lot on the left, which is you can't really talk about individual consumer choices because 100 companies are responsible for 70% of climate change. The problem is capitalism, it's not us as consumers. Do you have sympathy with that argument, or is it not quite right?
I mean, I have sympathy with that argument. It's important to know who those companies are so that we can legislate around them and drive down emissions through the reducing production. But there is a big problem with consumption as well. So 52% of the world's emissions came from the richest 10% of people in the world. So 630 million people produced those 52% of emissions from 1990 to 2015. And the problem's getting worse. Half the increase in emissions over that 25-year period came from those richest 10%.
But lots of people say, I don't feel like I'm in the richest 10%. I'm a renter. I've got student debt. I work at a Costa. I don't feel like I'm in the richest 10%. So is there a problem with mapping class society as it exists in the global north onto the world as a whole?
I think the best way to think about climate change is that it's a government problem and it's an investment problem. We need the government to take action to make those choices, the green choices, the cheapest choices, and the easiest to make choices.
But what if our desires aren't virtuous? Because I talk to a guy who says, I like my SUV because it's big, and that's all there is to it. And it's easy for me to go, you're a dumbass, you're a climate ogre, you're terrible. But I have a mini SUV in the form of a burger, right? I know eating meat is bad. So how do you tap into that space of our desires?
Yeah, I mean, it's true, like our desires are shaped by society and they are shaped by consumption through advertising. And that's got to change, and that is partly about, the left in particular telling a different and a better story about meeting your desires without that hedonic treadmill of like, I just want the extra burger, I just want a little bit bigger SUV, and then I'll feel better about myself. Because that's not the way we do feel better about ourselves, but that's what we're tapped into by seeing all this advertising and responding to it. And that's like reform of the media and reform of the way we see society and the way we see what is a good life.
Do you think that we're kidding ourselves and others about the scale of the disruption that's needed to decarbonise as quickly as possible?
I think there'll be much more disruption than people think when they set it out on paper like that. And all sorts of details of our lives will shift. But what's important to remember, I think, is that contemporary society is shifting fast anyway, and the climate is going to change and shift things fast. The question is whether we have like rapid disruption towards civilizational collapse, or we have rapid and disruptive activity towards something much better and a much more sustainable society. But disruption is coming. We've left the problem too late to think that there's some smooth glide path towards a sustainable future.
We normally think of climate denial as an outright rejection of a 99.9% scientific consensus holding, in spite of all evidence, that human activities aren't having an impact on global temperatures. But as I tramped up and down the streets of Kensington and Chelsea, I realised that there's a softer and perhaps more pernicious climate denial that we're all a bit complicit in. None of us really want to confront just how much our lifestyles need to change if we're to preserve a habitable planet. Some of those changes will undoubtedly improve lots of people's lives. Cheap, clean and abundant energy from renewable sources, greener public spaces and well-insulated homes are all pretty attractive. But if you've spent your life being conditioned to think that buses are for losers and bicycles are for cucks, then you're probably less inclined to feel like you want to give up your ginormous SUV or even part from your hopes of owning one. We like to think of our wants as sacred, the religion of individual choice. If an individual, somebody who is in the richest 10% of the world's population, chooses to spend their own hard-earned money on an SUV, even when we know there's a rapidly narrowing window to stop the planet heating to catastrophic temperatures, then who am I, or anybody, to question it? The climate is changing faster than our culture seems able to. As a society, we tend to condemn destruction or damage to property, but climate vandalism remains curiously acceptable. A Green New Deal is all well and good, but let's get real. The new left optimism of a solar panel on every roof and a travel card for all is perhaps a little bit limited, while somebody in Chelsea thinks their freedom to drive a Range Rover trumps the right of the Maldives to preserve a life above sea level. Look, it's easier not to own an SUV than it is to have one. But if the planet is to have any hope, it should be made even harder.